Hi, and welcome to the Design Systems Podcast. This podcast is about the place where design and development overlap. We talk with experts to get their point of view about trends in design, code, and how it relates to the world around us. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Knapsack. Check us out at knapsack.cloud. If you want to get in touch with the show, ask some questions, or generally tell us what you think, go ahead and tweet us at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you. Hey everyone, welcome to the Design Systems Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Strahl. Today I'm here with Jackie Lai. Jackie is a lead UX designer at OPIS, a Dow Jones company. Jackie, welcome to the program. Excited to have you here.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
So you have a really interesting background that led you into the world of design systems in maybe not a totally atypical way, but a really interesting one. And that you did a lot with physical design. So why don't you talk a little bit about your history with design, what you've worked on, and what's kind of led you to this point?
So I studied interactivity design 20 years ago. And then I worked in web design, and we would call it product design now, but it's just things that are done in Director or Flash back then. So I did a lot of those. And then 2008 hit, I actually lost a lot of clients. So I got actually just focused on product design, physical product design, such as fashion. I worked as lead designer for MLB kits, and also with Champion for boys and men's graphic products, also in different publishing and commercial real estate and packaging design and home goods. So all of these experiences gave me a more of an intuitive understanding of product design. Now, coming back to it, the scene has really changed from when I left it, right? Because, we didn't really talk about user experience back then. But now coming back to it, we really emphasize on the user experience aspect of it, which is sort of baked in the industrial design now. And it's intuitive to me because, if you're pushing out a product, you have to make sure that it's accessible, it's user friendly, that people are going to love it, or else they're not going to buy it, right? So that to me seems just really familiar.
So you took this time where you were doing early stuff on the web. I also was around in the era of Flash and Fireworks and even Dreamweaver and everything like that.
Yep.
And so, life has definitely changed a lot since then. I can't even imagine thinking about accessibility for Flash animation. But that ability to work in the web and then through, the 2008 crisis and everything like that, end up in a place where you weren't working on the web, but still doing design, and now coming back to the world of the web. A lot of that intuitiveness that you feel, do you think that is from your experience very early on? Or is that like really borrowing heavily from what you learned in the physical space, now being brought back into the digital space?
I have to say your experience is what you take with, right? I can't really pinpoint exactly which one came from where. But on a general sense, I think the ability to adopt to different tools is something that I learned early on, right? Like you have to go from like Director used to be the hottest thing out there, right? And then Flash took over, and then Dreamweaver used to be the thing, but then it's no longer being used, right? So it's to understand that flow with tools, and nothing is permanent. And in terms of product design side, the physical product side, it's just a lot of working cross-functionally with partners and then collaborating and then being able to discuss what the scope of the project is and what could and could not be achieved, right, within a particular budget. Like if we're talking about fashion, we're talking about pennies and cents, right? So like anything counts. And there was like one project that I was working on back at Hanes. I was with Champion, but then one of the product was trying to design things printed on a large t-shirt. And we had to like calculate how much dot per inch conversion to what's being printed ink-wise to save on ink. That's the type of large scale savings that we're looking for. So in that sense, you really have to work cross-functionally with everybody. And if you have an issue, you really have to reach out and understand the other side of the equation so that you can adjust.
So wait. For this fashion brand, you were basically saying like, okay, so I have pixel widths on a design file. I need to understand what that equates to in terms of the amount of ink that is used on the shirt because that shirt is going to be printed like a million times. And if
Exactly.
you're saving like 5 cents per shirt, that adds up.
We're talking about fraction of a penny.
That's
But
amazing.
it adds up. It really adds up. And what we did was at the time they hired a mathematician to do the conversion, and there was like a large equation. And then at the time, each one of the designers will have to run that equation before every single iteration just to tally up all the dot per inches to see if the conversion makes sense. It has to be below a certain amount of dot per inch. And design is design. If you're coming up with a graphic, like how much of it do you erase to make this work, right? And then the iteration process happens on a regular basis. So I had to work the equation backwards. And I'm not a mathematician, right?
Right,
But
right.
I had to work the equation backwards so that I could come up with a number where you could select all and be able to tell if that dot per inch is going to match the below or above the dot per inch for the printed version. So that in itself is like service design. Like I'm creating an equation that will work for our designers so that I can save money down the line. Because, having designers to do that equation every time that they have to do this, it's going to cost a lot of money. So early on, I'm doing like service design and foundational things for the teams.
Well, it reminds me of the challenges that you faced on the web too, with label or text box overflows and screen widths. So like, where do you put your breakpoints and how do you manage those breakpoints to make sure that you don't have a bunch of label overflows? Because much like how you can't just leave like the S off of Hanes to print something on a garment,
Right,
you can't just
right,
like not have all of your text displayed for a label.
right, totally.
So now then coming back and working in the web again, with this mindset of, hey, like tools are changing all the time, service design, of this idea of how you structure to deliver on basically your promises as a designer, was design systems a natural fit coming back? Did that feel comfortable and homey for you? Or was that still a really uncomfortable foreign structure?
No, it makes complete sense. The way I described a design system is like industrialization in the product world, right? You have like mom and pop shop, and then you have industrialization, and you get into like these different steps and levels. And for me, like design system is really going to industrialize how design is being produced, right? So how do you consistently make sure that everything that is produced is look and feel the same across the board or similar across the board, right? So those are issues that we have to deal with. And it's interesting, one of your podcasts mentioned about Conway's Law, right? It's like, well, it makes sense if the company is structured differently, and then the product will reflect that. And it's the same thing. Like if the structure of how you produce the product isn't systemized, then you will down the line have these issues of inconsistency.
Well, it's interesting too, thinking about what is the analog in the industrial space or the physical space, right? Like, very rarely are you actually designing to build one thing. Usually you're actually designing to build a whole lot of something physical, like even something as simple as a tennis ball, right? Relatively simplistic in its design, but it's still made up of a set of reusable things. You got the two halves of the ball, you've got the adhesive and the rubber that hold it together, and then you got the fuzz that goes on the outside. There's probably a technical name for tennis ball fuzz, but I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
Yeah, but the idea of those things as reusable elements that constructed together make a tennis ball, I think is really fascinating, because in the world of physical product design, you have to think in reusable components. There isn't something that is bespoke, because unlike the world of digital, where you're kind of building something once and then you're having millions or billions of eyeballs hit that thing, like you're building one physical thing for every person that's going to use it. And that mindset just like bakes systems in so repeatedly.
Right. I'm so glad that you mentioned this. In the world of fashion, there's issues with standardization, right? Every single size is going to be different depending on the brand that you're talking about. And then on top of that, like, if you're talking about, design system and whether or not a company should or should not adopt it. And it varies, right? If you're a company that is mass producing a product, then systemizing makes sense, right? But if you are producing the bespoke look, in high fashion haute couture, right? Then you probably don't need a design system. Design system isn't for you. So if we're talking from that perspective, I would say that some companies are perfect fit for adopting design system, and then some company just isn't. Just don't even bother because you're just wasting your money and there's no need for it.
It's really interesting when I think about the parallels there, right? So, what does a bespoke company that makes digital products look like? You can think about like white label things, right? And so sometimes that makes sense, but then the design system is almost the product itself, right? Because the design system is then being placed in the hands of somebody else to go apply a brand to or to remix the components however they want. We deal so much with the mass production, especially at enterprise scale for the web. I am curious what you think a bespoke piece is. Is that your record label or your brewery or something like that that has like a very particular feel to it? What do you feel like that bespoke analog is?
Several things, right? Like the bespoke part, I think can be, well, should be adopted into the design system because each company is different. A company that is making mostly charts and graphs probably have different design system needs than a company who produces magazine type of look and feel for it, right? So like the scale of things will be different. You don't have as much of a contrast in terms of scale. So the bespoke aspect will be part of the things when you produce a design system. But the bespoke part is more like systemized, the bespoke, right? So you have to understand who your company is, what the scope is, what it is that your design system needs to serve, and then work backwards in terms of how you wanted to build those foundational tokens. And then whether or not those foundational tokens can support the growth of what your system needs. Early on, we looked at a lot of design systems out there. There's always something about it that we cannot adopt, right? It doesn't work for us. And then the more project I work on, the more iteration that I did, it made me realize it's the foundation. It's how I build the foundation. So like these foundational pieces, it depends on how wide or how intricate you build them. It's going to give you the multi-layered lift that you need to accommodate the growth.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about it in terms of like starting at the end and working backward, right? That I think is something that people ultimately that are tasked with design systems sometimes get into trouble with, right? Because you have to place the value in the right spot. And the placing the value in the design system means that it's somewhat misplaced. A design system only really exists to be able to build products faster and better and cheaper. And so if you're thinking about it in terms of that endpoint, about how are you serving those needs, that's where the value creation is. The value creation isn't in the design system itself. The design system becomes a part of that value chain that's very intimately tied to it. But just building a really epic design system isn't all that meaningful if you're not servicing the ability to build the actual like user facing experiences faster and better and cheaper.
Right, exactly. It's a double-edged sword as well because I don't know what I don't know, right? If I'm working on some project and there's always a new project that come up, those are blindside, like that you don't know, right? And then once you start working on those projects, then you end up incorporating it or elaborating it in your design system so that makes your design system stronger.
I love that you have this take that is pretty nuanced on exactly where this stuff fits. What has kind of led you to have this take? Because we talked earlier about your background, how you were doing stuff in the web, you went into physical, you're back in the web. There's a lot of intimidating, daunting things for people that are just getting started. And you seem to have a fairly well-formed opinion of how this fits, specifically within Opus. But like, how do you think about that situationality, that challenge that you faced coming into this, not having a ton of experience with actual design systems yet?
It's definitely daunting, very intimidating to even think about design system. When I first was asked to do a design system, my response is it's almost like designing a uniform for someone. If I don't know what you do, I don't know if this uniform needs to be waterproof or not, what your size is, right? And who your factory is. I wouldn't be able to create this design system for you. And in order for me to do that, I will have to learn more about your company and your product and everything, right? So that's what I told the senior leadership. And I'm really fortunate that our leadership has been very supportive in my discovery, different projects and whatnot. I pretty much sit on almost all the projects so that I get a bird's eye view of what goes on and what is needed for the design system. We also have like a pilot project that we're trying to use this design system. And the design pattern, which is something that I really wanted to emphasize on, is something that we're testing out with different projects, right? So to me, like when I face something that is intimidating, I just try to like forget about the intimidation side of it. It's like, like I
Push that
just have to
aside.
find out, push that aside because, at the end of the day, you need to put one foot in front of the other and then find out exactly what resources you have, like focus on finding those resources. And early on, I'm a huge fan of this podcast. So that makes it so awesome to be able to be on this show. I would go for a jog in the morning and then I would plug in and listen to this. And then I didn't know too much about it and still in the research and discovery phase. And then it really helped me a lot in terms of understanding and getting the mindset right. It's not about how do you pick colors? How do you build a button? How do you build this component? And what's the breakpoint? It's not about that. It's about system thinking. And that I think is the most important to designing a design system because you don't want to just focus on the details. It's interesting. It's like you have to have your brain in the clouds and foot in the ground to be able to do this thing because you have to have the big picture. You also have to be practical in terms of how you're going to implement this.
Yeah, and Jackie, we love having fans of the show. They get to join the show. It's awesome.
Yeah,
And I
totally.
know you've listened to this for years at this point. So
Yep,
really appreciate you being on here and sharing your wisdom. And I don't know, it's heartwarming to hear that this was influential for you as you were starting your journey.
definitely.
You talked about resources and you talked about finding out stuff. But I think one of the things that you said that was really concrete is like, how do you put one foot in front of the other? And I think that very often, especially when people are starting out with design systems, you go and you do your research and you look at things like carbon and material, and you all at News have News Kit. And a lot of that exploration of those systems gives you an idea of what's possible. But there's also the idea of like what's practical for you, not having a bunch of full-time dedicated engineers, not having a large team to fall back on that helps you build this thing. I think you took a really practical approach at Opus of basically saying like, we don't need to have some major critical mass, or we don't need to have some extremely well thought out, extremely deep design system. We just need to get started with something. And I think that this was actually really a great lesson where so many people that we see in the design system landscape, some of them are even our customers, feel this constant urge that it's like, it's not ready. It's not ready. It's not ready. It's not ready. It needs to have just one more component or just, one more theme or one more set of design tokens before it'll actually be ready. And at the moment that it's ready, that suddenly like everyone will look at this beautiful thing that's been created and throw their hat in the air and start cheering. I think you took a very different approach here. And I think that that's something that's worth sharing, in that your thought process has largely been like, how do I create some incremental value and immediately get that in the hands of people? Can you talk about that a little bit and kind of your thought process there? Because it is a really great way to avoid some of the traps that I was just talking about.
Right. So you talked about how I got started early on. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to find out different viewpoints in this equation, right? One of the saying in Chinese is like, think three times before you make a move. But what it really means is to think from your point of view, my point of view, and his or her point of view, right? So that is actually something that I took into practice when it comes to approaching things like this. So I spoke to a lot of people early on, like how does the dev department feel about adopting design systems? What are the pros and cons? What are some of the things that they run into that becomes problematic, right? There's pushbacks to a lot of design systems, and there are design systems that is perfectly done and it's like it looks amazing. However, it cannot be adopted to existing product. It can only be done in a certain way for this particular project, right? So that's something that I'm really wary of, and that's something I don't want it to get into. So early on, I'm focusing more on the patterns, like refining those design decisions and those design patterns, and then trying it out among like different designers within our group. So Lori, my manager, Lori has been very supportive. So we've also been hashing out some of the great, decisions like design decisions, and then trying it out on different products in different area. And that gives us quick feedback in terms of like what works, what doesn't work, what do we want it to update, instead of making it so official where it's like, here we have this amazing product and here, use it, right? That's not what we want. We want it to be practical to make sure that things work. And some of the foundational project that I worked on is like, service design for making template in like Power BI and making sure that all teams and all sub companies can utilize this one template and be able to create reports that are, inserted into the web. So that uses JSON as well, with tokens. So, however, it's not exactly the same design token. It cannot align to our design tokens, right? So like, how do we make sure that is aligned? That's a question. Like, how do you equate one to one, with a third party app that has different logic in terms of utilizing their tokens. So early on, we faced that.
I love that you think about that in terms of, okay, so I need to maintain a separate set of tokens for what is ostensibly like an information tool and a reporting tool that is independent from the actual like development of the web products you work on, but you're trying to keep those concepts consistent. We talked a little bit earlier about how design systems can feel daunting and intimidating. I think that it's not just to the maintainers of the design system, right? It's to the people that actually have to adopt these things as well. And so the thought process around like, what do my engineers think? What do my designers think? What do my product people think? What do the people over in like data and analytics think about this stuff? That becomes a really interesting way of building a groundswell around not just like, hey, we have this cool thing that we're doing, but this way of working inside the organization. And I do think so much of this comes down to service design. I love hearing you say that because it's really, really important that we also think about the service models that come along with our design systems. Because if we're not considering that, either because things are daunting or challenging, or because things are not quite totally baked, oftentimes people will avoid the tools for something that feels more familiar. And the service design model is specifically intended to help people overcome that avoidance or that idea that something new is going to be more work for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the way I think of it is like a pyramid, right? Like whatever work you need to do, it still exists. So whether it exists in the larger side of the pyramid, the bottom side of the pyramid, or you elevate it to the top side of the pyramid and make it more efficient is something that I wanted to recognize. And those are the things that the processes or certain project that you can elevate that to a higher level so you get it done once and then everybody on the bottom, benefits from it. And it's completely aligned with the whole design system philosophy, right? Just to elevate those problems so that everybody benefits from it, right?
Absolutely. And it also keeps that like, what is the value really in mind? And the value is in the ability to build product. One of the questions I have from this then is like, okay, so you have a bunch of things that are in various stages of testing, various conversations that you're having. lots of stuff that's going kind of to a lot of different places with this intention of supporting the way we build product. When somebody asks you, is this ready? Or is the design system ready? How do you answer that question? And what in your mind are the factors you're thinking through when you respond to something like that?
Oh, I just love that question. So it will never be ready. It's like personal growth. The way I think of it is personal growth. Are you done growing? Like, are you done with your personal growth? If you're done, then you're dead, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So it's the same thing with design system. Will it ever be done? No. As long as the company exists, as long as the company grows, as long as the company expands, right? It's doing well, then the design system will continue to grow with the company.
No, I love that. I think that just the mere idea of a static design system to me represents that lack of innovation that everybody fears, right? Especially early on when I was first getting into the world of design systems, you'd hear a lot, mostly from designers, but from engineers as well. Like, a design system is constraining. It doesn't allow me to do the things that I need to do or the things I want to do. I can't drop that S off my printed t-shirt to be able to meet my ink usage goals. And my response to that was always like, yeah, but like, if it needs to be different every time, like, how different does it need to be, right? Is that representative of a variant? Is that representative of a new component? What does that mean when you say that it's too restrictive? And I think that the best way of thinking about it is like, if you consider a design system to be a static object that is unchangeable and unchanging, then yeah, it is restrictive. But with the idea of like, this will constantly iterate, improve, change as the organization changes, as trends change, then it becomes this more like living thing that doesn't feel restrictive anymore.
It definitely needs to grow with the organization. Yeah, I agree.
So Jackie, in your experience then building the system at Opus and the learnings you've had, what would you want to share with people that are maybe just getting started or trying to figure things out in a very early moment that could help them along this journey? What is something you wish you were armed with, some level of knowledge or some learning or shortcut when you were first getting going?
Definitely learn as much as you can about the company that you're working with. And then on the side, definitely read. There's like so much materials out there. There's, Industrial Design book by Henry Dreyfuss. There's also Brad Frost. Gina Ann is amazing. Nathan Curtis, Dan Mall, all of these great people. Listen to them, listen to the podcasts, and also like ADP list. I'm a mentor as well as a mentee or protege on ADP list. And I also have a lot of mentors who is working in the design system. So they will be able to give you a lot of feedback and ideas in terms of, challenges and whatnot. So definitely sign up for that. Those are some of the points that helped me along this beginning of my journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I love it when fans and listeners of the show can come on and talk about their success in the world of design systems. So congratulations for everything that you've been able to accomplish so far. And I'm really just so grateful that you're a listener and are willing to share your time with us. Any final thoughts?
Actually, two final thoughts. One is that in order to deal with the change in things, it's best to stick with the fundamentals. Make sure that your fundamentals are done in a way where it serves you in order to be able to adapt to different changes, because those are agnostic. You don't know. So stick with the fundamentals. Make sure they're solid, right? Another thing is, since we report on energy, right? I just wanted to leave with the energy idea. Like, energy can neither be created or destroyed. So that goes similar to workload, right? The workload, either you elevate it upstream or it gets trickled downstream, which becomes inefficient. So do focus on things that can make your company more efficient.
Thank you, Jackie. This has been the Design Systems Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Strahl. Have a great day, everyone. That's all for today. This has been another episode of the Design Systems Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or a topic you'd like to know more about, find us on Twitter at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you with show ideas, recommendations, questions, or comments. As always, this pod is brought to you by Knapsack. You can check us out at knapsack.cloud. Have a great day.